It is my great pleasure to introduce Joe Weinman. Joe Weinman and I have known each other for many years. I met Joe when he was at AT&T, and this was back in the days where we had hosting and ASPs. We've then evolved to things like Colo, and now we have various issues in cloud computing. And so Joe's going to talk a little bit about digital disciplines and how to be successful in this new age of digital transformation. So Joe, please.
Thank you, Maribel. Boy, those days seem like thousands of years ago. I'm going to jump right in. I know everyone wants to check their email and everything and deal with work emergencies, so just pay attention for the first 5 slides and you'll get it, and then you can doze off or pay attention. But basically what I'm going to do is talk about mostly my new book. It's not that new anymore. It's been out for a year or two. But it covers, of course, digital transformation and digital strategies and things like that. And I just thought I'd start off with this slide, which is executives anticipating substantial digital disruption. This slide to me is interesting because, first of all, everyone anticipates it. But the other thing is I see this as something of an IQ test in the sense that I think all these numbers should be around 100%, regardless of industry, because that's what we're seeing is that there's nobody that is immune from this. So some of you may know I wrote a book called Cloudonomics a few years ago. I'm fortunate in that it's still on a good day, top 100 cloud computing, even after 5 years. And it was really focused on cost and performance optimization. And I used to give a lot of keynotes around the contents of Cloudonomics, but it had one major flaw, which was equations. And that would put everyone to sleep because nobody likes equations besides me. And the editor actually said, Joe, every equation you put in that book is going to reduce the audience by 50%. So you can work out the exponent there. So I used to have a little bit on strategy and lots of equations, and then I had more on strategy and less on equations, and eventually I realized I have a whole book that's just dying to be written around exactly that. So I'm going to cover this, and in a way it's very straightforward. Some of you may remember the book Discipline of Market Leaders by Michael Tracy and Fred Wiersema. Michael Tracy was the index guy with a bow tie back about 20 years ago or so. That is a great book. And they introduce terms that we take for granted today, like operational excellence and customer intimacy and product leadership. When I was doing a review of different strategy frameworks, including obscure ones like the Kepner-Trigo driving forces model, I really settled back on the Tracy and Wiersema value disciplines approach. And even though it's great, the problem is that the book was written 20 years ago. And a lot has changed since then, right? Like I had a cell phone installed in my car by professionals, right? The 20-pound cell phone, you remember that. And obviously a lot has changed. So it isn't just a matter of putting the word digital or virtual in front of everything, because it turns out that the fundamental essence of strategy, of creating customer value, of creating strategic differentiation, everything changes with digital. So the 4 disciplines that I identified, the first one I call information excellence. And this is the mirror image, if you would, of operational excellence. But it's more complex than that because information can be used to optimize, supplant, fuse with, or monetize physical operational processes. But just think of that top left one as being better processes, better use of resources, not just limited to utilization, and better organization structures thanks to digital. The second major thing is solution leadership, and that's the evolution of standalone dumb products to smart digital connected products and services. And as you start thinking about this, you realize that the very nature of what a product or service is doesn't make any sense anymore. So is an Amazon Dash button, for example, is that a product that I can buy and gets delivered and is tangible according to classic marketing theory? Or is it a replenishment service that just happens to have a physical point of presence? So think of solution leadership as being better products and services that are smart, digital, connected, and integrated. Third major thing is the evolution of traditional customer intimacy to what I call collective intimacy. And the idea there is, if you think about traditional customer intimacy, either in a B2B or B2C context, what that really has entailed is many pairwise firewalled relationships that are human mediated, that are small scale. And I think of a butcher or a tailor saying, hey Joe, how are you? You know, do you want your favorite cut of beef or whatever? They maybe know you, they know your name, maybe they know your family, but that is obviously not a scalable model. And then the one thing that Tracy and Virsima never really dealt with correctly, in my view, is the nature of innovation. They lumped innovation in under product leadership, with the idea being that if you're a product leader, your products are innovative and market leading. But the fact is that there's plenty of opportunities for process, resource, and organizational innovation. Think, for example, Walmart cross-docking logistics, or for customer relationship innovation, like one-click ordering as an example. So I broke out innovation, and it turns out that technology becomes important. So you can all leave now, unless you want to stay, you're welcome to. But that's basically the 4 major areas in which digital makes a difference. Better processes, resources, and organization structure, better products and services, better customer relationships, and better innovation. So to cover operational excellence and how it can be, again, evolved to information excellence, there are a variety of ways in which this can happen. The book is 400 pages, so it's going to be hard to compress everything just into a few slides, but this will at least give you a flavor for what's up. So traditional operational excellence, think about the Model T. It wasn't Henry Ford's first car, it wasn't the first internal combustion engine car, but it was the car that changed civilization. To put it another way, it wasn't a different product really, it had the same wheels and the same engine, but it was a different process that created it, namely mass production and interchangeable parts. That process innovation drove down the cost of ownership, which changed everything, petrochemical-based geopolitics and so forth. And there's lots more ways than cost and convenience in which processes can be improved and differentiated. These are just a few of them off the top of my head. I'm sure you could add your own. But to take an example that we all know and love, ride-sharing services, what really happened there? And I'm an old process engineer. I'm both old and a former process engineer. But basically, here's my analysis of what happened. If you think about traditional taxi services, there was a pretty straightforward process, right? You held up your hand on a street corner to order one. The taxi arrived and took you to your destination. The meter told you what the price was. From that, you provided like a credit card for your payment details, and then payment was made, including the tip and whatever else you added in. So I know we talked a little bit yesterday about incremental innovation, and incremental innovation is certainly better than no innovation. Most of you know GE's 1% rule, that a 1% improvement in a multi-billion-dollar market, a few tens of millions here, a few billions there, and pretty soon you're talking real money. That's great, but what does a true disruption look like based on digital? Well, if you look at these process steps, everything changed. So first of all, pricing is provided at the point of ordering service. Secondly, you have a variety of service delivery options that you can select. Then there is much more than fixed pricing. There is dynamic pricing, which some people don't like, but from a yield management and profit maximization perspective and scarce resource allocation perspective, it works out very effectively. Also, obviously, the ability to order mobile, which mobile ordering for taxi used to mean you would walk down the street trying to wave, but that's a little different definition of mobile. The ability to determine exactly when your ride was going to arrive. But then another big switch was the fact that the mobile device and an app basically enabled a long-term relationship with a client. Now, obviously, there have been ways to do that before, things like loyalty cards or using your phone number or email address. But that also really transforms everything, because now you can get longitudinal data analysis around that particular client, but also the client doesn't need to enter the payment details each time, so that step vanishes. And of course, there's just automatic payment at the end, so that step also vanishes. But in addition to that, there are all these other value-added services, which I won't belabor the point because you know what they are, things like the ability to provide feedback for customers and for drivers, the ability to archive data so that I can look up a ride at another point and use it to submit a receipt for my expense report, the ability to resolve issues, and then also one thing that I think is interesting is the ability to monetize that data. So for example, Uber has done a deal with Starwood, where if you're a Starwood Gold member, like I'm sure Carl is a Starwood Platinum super duper member, but if you have that relationship, Uber has the data on you and it can easily push promotions to you like, why are you staying at that Hilton where we just dropped you off? Don't you know that the Starwood here is much better, it's a higher rated hotel, it's more convenient to your next destination that you always go to, and we'll give you a 10% off coupon so you can try it, this once, and by the way, the rate is lower. So conceptually, those are all the things you can do. This is obviously radical transformation. So what else is going on in terms of using information in conjunction with operational excellence? Physical automation, like Amazon does with their Kiva robots, with optimized warehouse logistics, robotic process automation for more software-based and virtual processes. Rob Rojas, I don't know if he's here from UPS, was in one of my little breakout sessions. UPS is doing something super cool. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's the UPS Orion system. The computational complexity of delivering items to people and businesses is astronomical. So for one route with 120 stops on average, there are one followed by 200 zeros. In other words, a trillion, 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 trillion different combinations of possible route sequences. They have 55,000 of those routes. And being able to optimize them means that you can do things like increase sustainability, improve labor productivity, reduce carbon footprint / fuel consumption, et cetera. Other things going on, digital physical fusion, so now combining physical operations with virtual information. Burberry is a good example of that. They were an innovator in taking their physical runway shows and then delivering them in real time to their flagship stores. They've done so much that I added, there's a chapter dedicated to them in my book, for the period in which they grew much faster than the luxury goods market as a whole and went from being perceived as a vendor of basically sort of cheap, expletive deleted, to being a true luxury goods manufacturer. And what's amazing to me about examples like this, and Gino, Liz, and I were talking about similar things at lunch, the whole transformation of Domino's Pizza, which Min runs a competitor. And what they've done is nothing short of amazing when you think about, I'm making pizza, right? Yet I view myself as a tech company, or I'm selling wool scarves, and technology is essential both in terms of the end-to-end customer journey as well as back office operations and everything in between. So Burberry has done all these cool things. In their flagship store on Regent Street, they have over 200 digital signs. They've got RFID tags in many of their clothing items. So literally, if you walk into a dressing room, a mirror will turn into a display which will now show a clip from a runway show showing a model wearing that, but also complete customer history is available at the sales associate's fingertips. So they've got integration between Salesforce and SAP that lets any sales associate be able to say, oh yes, well this will go great with that thing you bought 2 years ago. They've got many more things that they do, but they're a great example of basically taking just basic non-technical, non-digital products and leveraging digital in all aspects of the retail experience. Nike is another great example. I didn't know this till I started researching it, but the typical athletic shoe, which I call a sneaker, has something like 30 to 35 individual pieces that are laboriously sewn together to make the shoe at the end of it. So if that's the case, labor costs are high. If labor costs are high, then what you want to do, of course, is find the cheapest you can and do that at the expense potentially of supply chain intervals. So that's exactly what they and every other apparel manufacturer did, offshore manufacturing. So what they did is they redesigned the shoe, so it's now basically a 3D printed product, only it isn't 3D printing. They adapted knitting machines for socks, and they went from 36 pieces down to 2 pieces, which is the sole and then this upper. And that has major implications to everything. For example, you don't need to, they still do, but I'm sure someday they'll reveal that they aren't anymore, manufacturing offshore and shipping via Costco with a laborious trans-Pacific journey. But with these, the knitting machine can be placed in the store, so literally you can walk in, design your custom shoe to your fit, to your design specs, personalize it with your initials if you want, and have it manufactured there like Build-A-Bear workshop, only now it's Build a Shoe workshop, and walk out of that store 2 minutes later with your very own shoe. Blockchain, which Christine will be talking about tomorrow, is obviously important as well in terms of the potential to transform supply chains. If you don't know, Everledger.io is a very cool company that is helping to solve the conflict diamond problem by etching a unique serial number on every diamond at the point of mining, and then as it goes to these different parties, so the miner, the cutter, the certifier, the distributor, the retailer, you can be assured that it's compliant with the anti-conflict diamond process. And then the last interesting example, which I think every company can leverage, is exhaust data monetization. In other words, getting data. Now, for whatever reason, 23andMe came up last night in conversation, but does anyone know what business they are in? Yell it out if you do. Gene mapping. No. That's what they say they do. That's what everyone thinks they do. Their real business is selling data. So in one deal with Genentech for one disease, which is Parkinson's, they made as much money as they did in all of the genetic test kits that they had ever sold. And that's just for one thing. The other great thing about this example is that it's highly ethical, because if I'm at risk for Parkinson's, I would like nothing more than for someone, anyone, to figure out a cure. So let them make their money. Just go ahead and figure out a cure for me ASAP. So that is processes and resources, right, in those prior examples. I also want to talk just briefly about the evolution of the firm. So this is a picture of the Ford River Rouge plant. It was the largest factory in its time, 1.6 square miles back in the early 1900s. And what they did, the sort of joke or line goes, is cows and iron ore would come in at one end and automobiles would go out the other, right? So they could do everything. They could smelt the ore, they could, make the leather, they could do whatever they needed to from raw materials, and it's kind of like Foxconn is now for parts. Well, that's great, but the vertically integrated firm has been unbundled. Apple is a good example of that. So what Apple has done is really focused on design and engineering. Everyone knows that most of their manufacturing is done by Foxconn, often with Samsung components. And actually, people love Apple stores, but a minority of their revenue comes from the Apple store. Everything else comes through channel partners. So take those 3 different portions of a company and now unbundle that even a more fragmented fashion. Li & Fung is one of the largest apparel manufacturers in the world. They own exactly 0 factories. They have a constellation of 10,000 suppliers, and the exact configuration of those suppliers changes day by day or hour by hour. So right now, this shirt maybe is manufactured in Vietnam with thread from Thailand and buttons from Japan. An hour from now, it might be a completely different mix. And ultimately, you can think about sort of real-time onboarding of resources and corporate partners, and Uber is a good example of that, as is Airbnb and so forth, where the structure of the firm has completely disintegrated away from a vertically integrated monolith into the organizational equivalent of scalable microservices. So hopefully that gives you at least a flavor of the notion of, if your business strategy is to differentiate based on process parameters like time, speed, cost, convenience, sustainability, reliability, et cetera, then you can use digital to help engineer everything behind it. Second major strategy you'll remember I mentioned is better products and services. So what's going on there? First of all, they become smart, digital, and connected. That in turn enables the performance to be real time. And then I won't get into it, but there's this great model. There are several models that are really useful here. One is the notion of the augmented and potential product. In other words, what you buy is not actually what you end up owning because of things like upgrades and extensions. And the other is, some of you may be familiar with the experience economy framework, where the idea is that increasing value and profit comes as we move from mere commodities that are mined or fished or extracted to products, to services, but then ultimately to experiences, and then transformations. And so I won't get into it really, but a simple case there is coffee beans. If you buy a pound of coffee beans, it costs you maybe a nickel. If you were like a coffee roaster. If you then roast them and package them, then it's a few dollars a pound. If you sell it as a service, like let's say Dunkin' Donuts, then you get a few tens of dollars per pound. And then as you move up to an experience like the Ponte Vedra Inn, then I had a cup of coffee. I'm sure somebody in this room is going to be charged like $30 for that privilege because of the whole experience. And then the ultimate is transformations, which rather than ephemeral experiences are really about long-term value-adding transformations, which could be a business transformation, think McKinsey or a DXC services type of transformation, or a personal transformation like having brain surgery or getting a college degree. And so again, these connected products and services enable that. So what's going on there? Traditional product leadership was about better products that were manufactured to more precision tolerances, that had titanium and platinum and gold and the brand aura incorporated like a Rolex watch. And of course now these things are moving to be smart, digital, and connected. Apple Watch is an example of that, but so is the Adidas connected soccer ball, which measures with accelerometers inside exactly how hard and from what direction it's been hit. So that can be used for athletic training. Everything these days is obviously becoming smart and digital, and some of you may have seen, I assume it's the Proteus pill. I didn't have time because of all the interesting topics here to do anything more than see the Google News headline, but I assume it's the Proteus pill got FDA approval this morning, and that is a pill that reports when it's been ingested because it has a little Wi-Fi chip in it, so that's particularly valuable if you have someone like, say, my elderly mom, who doesn't completely have her wits about her, and making sure she takes critical medication would be important. So in turn, that's developing ecosystems. The Amazon Echo and Alexa system would be a good example of that. Autonomous vehicles are another example. But where it gets really interesting is this notion that it doesn't have to be a product portfolio that is integrated, but it can be a set of partnerships. And in my mind, I view at least two major levels. There's the actual infrastructure communications level, which in turn has multiple layers, no doubt. But then there's the strategic unifying principle layer. So Nike is a good example of this. Some of you may be familiar with the Nike Plus ecosystem and portfolio of products. So what Nike originally did is they had something you could put in your sneaker, and then they actually started manufacturing sneakers with accelerometers in them. So that would detect exactly how far and fast you ran, could tell you how high you jumped, because it knew when your feet left the ground and how many seconds later, so that defined the jump height, how quickly you accelerated with what type of lateral G-force, et cetera. So all that then worked with third-party scales and cardio equipment so that you could take activities and correlate them with actual results, right? So you could say, I did this much exercise today, and in turn, this is my result in terms of body fat percentage and my weight. So with that, that gives you a sense of what's feasible, not just from a technology perspective, because there's a developer.nike.com, and there's an API and an SDK and all that stuff. But besides that, the point is, what does it mean in terms of the customer relationship? If I am in the sneaker manufacturing business, what I used to do is have a factory that made lots of sneakers. I'd ship them to Walmart. Walmart would sell them to someone who I never even knew who it was, and there was zero customer relationship there, except the hope that the Nike brand and the swoosh were kind of cool, and people loved that, which worked until the kind of cool Under Armour logo came around and got the celebrity endorsements and so forth. But with this, what you now have is, I don't want to use the term lock-in, so I won't, but stickier customer relationships. And those stickier customer relationships are, if Nike has 5 years of data on you, it's going to be very difficult to suddenly change to a competitor, because how do I maintain my sort of longitudinal personal biohacking optimization? So Disney with Magic Bands is another great example of moving, not just moving from products to services to smart digital connected products and services to experiences, because now with Magic Bands, which was a $1 billion plus investment that Disney made, when I go into a theme park, I can unlock doors. Well, that's kind of nice, but really incremental rather than transformational. But also I can do things like, when I arrive at a restaurant, my order is waiting for me. I don't need to check in. I just have to sit down and my food arrives. And so that's kind of magical. But also when I go and see Mickey, rather than Mickey just kind of going like this for the whole time, Mickey can, I don't think they've done this yet, but literally say, Maribel, hi, how are you? How was your trip over from San Francisco? Did you like Pirates of the Caribbean, right? Because all of that data is there, and so it creates this experience out of what was just a theme park service, you might say. And then, again, with transformations being the ultimate in value, things like what Nike has done with Nike Plus partners, the Connect, Xbox Plus Connect, coaching applications which do personalized coaching for you, literally is a type of transformation. Finally, once I have all these different things that are operating at a higher level than individual disconnected products or services, I can create a 360-degree view of my customer. So this example is GE Dose Watch, which interfaces to lots of different radiological equipment, CT scanners, X-ray machines, et cetera. Any of those machines are independently calibrated to deliver a safe dose. So the problem isn't with any machine, typically, it's with many machines in a short period of time that are each disconnected. And so DoseWatch provides a complete view of the customer. This is obviously relevant to other domains. Think about, say, banking, where I want to combine personal loans with mortgages with equity portfolio information to do wealth management. Gamification is critical. I won't get into it for the sake of time, but obviously that's essential to making products and services more effective. This is the Ford Eco Guide, where the sort of more conservatively you drive, the leaves grow, and so it gamifies the driving experience as long as you don't hit anything because you're looking at the leaves instead of the road. And then you can also use gamification for services. So OPower, which got picked up by Oracle, is a great example of that. What they do is, there was a famous study done over a decade ago in California that basically asked customers to conserve electricity. And if you told a customer, hey, you can save $7 a month on your $53 bill, they're like, eh. If you told them, hey, you can save the planet and your children and grandchildren's planet, people were like, eh. But if you told them, hey, your neighbor Billy down the street is doing much better than you, they're like, hey, what? Wait a minute, what's going on here? So that concept of social proof and gamification actually has proven effective in conserving electricity, which is a key goal of utilities. Next major thing I'll cover is the evolution of customer intimacy to collective intimacy, and the idea there is moving from individual, small-scale, human-mediated, in-person relationships to the exact opposite. So hyperscale, things, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of customers, and all being done algorithmically and virtually. And maybe most important, rather than lots of pairwise relationships, the idea of taking information from everyone to deliver better services. So traditional customer intimacy was the tailor, the butcher, the personal physician, et cetera. But now when we think about the evolution, first of all, physical to virtual, everyone knows that, things like chatbots. More importantly is the evolution of relationships from anonymous transaction to ongoing relationship to customer intimacy to this notion of collective intimacy. And underlying all of that is a variety of different relationship styles like the one-night stand, which might be once in a life, that's what it's called, Harvard Business Review. You can see the sourcing there. I didn't come up with that. I understand. So if you were taking your family to Paris for a once-in-a-lifetime vacation, that would be an example of the one-night stand. It's essentially transactional, but it's high profit because, hey, it's my one time in Paris, of course I'm going to eat at, I don't know, Tour d'Argent or whatever. At the other extreme, there's marriage partners because of the importance and sanctity of marriage, Maribel, which is against the one-night stand principle. And so the idea there is that it's a long-term relationship, but because it's long-term, you expect things like volume discounts, so it's lower profit, even though it leads to higher market share. There's lots of other different styles which you can explore on your own cognizance. But the basic idea of collective intimacy is I have lots and lots of customers. I've got big data and analytics in the cloud. I pull information up from all those customers, and then what I do is use that to provide better independent recommendations for services. Now, that could be Netflix with their recommender. It could be Amazon for upsell, cross-sell. Could be Betterment for financial recommendations. Could be the Mayo Clinic, which maintains repositories of genetic data, epigenetic data, pharmacological efficacy, in other words, what drugs do to you based on your genetic profile, and microbiomic data, and deliver better recommendations, aka personalized medicine. And all the elements there, and Netflix is a great example of that, is moving away from simple demographics to attitudes, behaviors, contexts, leveraging external data, social graph data, and the user's goals. So Netflix collects trillions of data points on all of us. And those trillions of data points are things like behaviors. For example, did I rewind, did I fast forward, did I pause on this scene, did I watch the movie over again, or skip over it, never return to that. Even how I navigate on the home page is data that they collect. Context, is it my home location or while I'm away on a trip? Is it on an iPad or the family TV? Is it weekend or weeknight? Is it prime time, so I'm viewing with the family, or is it at 2 a.m.? So with all that data, they can deliver personalized recommendations at scale algorithmically, and that's an opportunity that we all can pursue. Last thing I'll cover is the evolution of innovation, and there's been an evolution there from what was the solitary inventor to Edison and shop invention at Menlo Park to the great corporate research labs of the day like GE and IBM and AT&T Bell Labs. Then there was this idea of open innovation, with the notion being that either for intellectual property or to get your intellectual property to market, you should work with select vendors. But now we're moving to a new era where if you look at the major steps of inventing something new, developing a successful business model and commercializing it at scale and having customers adopt it. What's going on is that the cloud and related technologies are important. How are they? Well, one way is things like the Netflix Prize, where big anonymized data sets are posted to the cloud and any bunch of solvers can now try and come up with a better solution to it. These have the benefits of contest economics, which is rather than paying your own internal R&D team, you basically are only paying for results. And especially if you don't know that the problem will ever have an answer, that's a particularly good way to fund it. IBM, some of you may have seen, they increased their number of qubits and they're targeting 50 qubits available commercially. And to me, that's very interesting because it used to be, if you take a look at traditional, the original S3 and EC2, you were looking at basic commodity type services delivered through a new business model. Now, with things like Watson or Q, and various others are looking at doing the same thing, you're talking about absolute state-of-the-art technologies being delivered either for free on a try before you buy basis, and the opportunities to co-create using that are incredible. And then, of course, the future of innovation lies with machines. So think about Google DeepMind, AlphaGo, which of course has beaten the top Go players in the world. Some of you may or not have heard of Melvin, which designs quantum physics experiments, but there's lots of opportunities there in terms of things like automated hypothesis generation and machine innovation, where the future of innovation lies with software and probably hardware too, like neuromorphic chips. So 4 disciplines, I won't repeat them since I'm out of time, but that's it. I'll be here for 2 days, so if you want to stop by and say hi, I will talk to you later. Thank you.